Hello and welcome. This is Richard Golson, and I'm here to take you through Lab 6, Scale and Load Balancer Architecture. Let's take a look at the lab overview and objectives. Now, this lab walks us through using elastic load balancing and auto-scaling services to load balance and automatically scale our infrastructure. Elastic load balancing automatically distributes incoming application traffic across multiple EC2 instances. So we can see here is a nice diagram that it actually allows us to distribute the traffic over not just EC2 instances, but also Lambda functions, Fargate, containers, EKS and ECS, or even just IP addresses to resources that are external to AWS. It allows us to achieve our fault tolerance in our applications by providing the required amount of load balancing capacity needed to route application traffic. So it's a fully managed AWS service where they manage the capacity requirements to route the traffic. So we don't have to worry about that piece. Now, auto scaling helps us to maintain the application availability. And what that does is it allows us to scale our EC2 capacity out or in automatically according to the conditions that we define. And so this allows us to provision additional EC2 instances to scale the capacity to address demand. So if we have an increased demand, we can increase the number of EC2 instances that will be deployed. We can manage and maintain the instance health, both load balancing and auto-scaling monitor the instances. And if an instance becomes unresponsive, it will terminate the instance and deploy a replacement. We get to balance our capacity across availability zones. This allows us to provide high availability in the event of an availability zone outage. And then we can update and replace our instances because we'll be using something called a launch template that will define what AMI we're going to use, which will include our application files. It also defines the instance type, meaning the type of CPU, the number of virtual CPUs, and the amount of memory. And so we can modify that so we can not only scale out and in, but scale up and down. All right, let's take a look over here. And we can see that by the end of this lab, we're going to be able to create an Amazon machine image or AMI, a custom AMI, from a running instance that is provided to us in the lab. We're going to create that load balancer we talked about. And so let's actually take a look at those while we're talking about it. So let's go over here and we can take a look. I meant to queue this up, but I didn't. So let's take a look at that AMI. And so we already have an AMI created. I set this up in advance so you can take a look at this is that custom AMI that was created that will be used in the lab. We have a load balancer already created, and you can see the load balancer here is called Lab ELB. It's currently active. It's using 2 availability zones. And so if we take a look, it has something called the listener, which is essentially is a rule that says, you know what, when we get traffic on port 80 to our load balancer, let's forward that to a group of EC2 instances that are part of a target group. And they're all going to be listening on port 80. So our load balancer will receive the traffic from the internet and forward it on to the EC2 instances. We're going to create a launch template and an auto scaling group. And if we take a look over here, we can see our auto scaling group and its group details. And so we have a desired capacity of 6, a minimum and a maximum capacity. We'll be learning about what these are, but these essentially allow us to control how many EC2 instances will be launched. We also use a scaling policy where we can track something like CPU usage and say, you know what, we want to keep our average CPU utilization at 60%. And anytime that the average CPU utilization exceeds 60%, we're going to scale out by adding additional instances until we can bring that average CPU utilization down. That is used with something called CloudWatch. So CloudWatch will provide us with the alarms that monitor that CPU usage. And then we can take a look here. We actually have one set up and we can view it on the graph, and we can see that CPU usage went way up. It actually exceeded the 60%, which is right here. And it's at that point that new EC2 instances would have been deployed until we can see that traffic drop down again, but it never dropped low enough to eliminate those instances. So additional traffic was increased, more traffic meant more CPU utilization. So we're back up to here again. And we can refresh this and take a look here. We can see that it's been kind of going up and down. We can see that's the average CPU utilization. Here we can see the 6 instances that were launched in response to the auto-scaling group and then the CloudWatch metrics watching average CPU utilization. And here we can see the application that we're running with the load test that's putting the load on the EC2 instances, which is driving the additional need for capacity. So this is putting a high CPU load. If we take a look down here, this is the starting of the scenario where we have a web server that's pre-configured with the application already installed using user data. And we have a database, and we won't actually be doing anything with the database in this lab. We'll see by the time we're done that we will have terminated that web server because we don't need it anymore, because we're going to replace it with the auto scaling group that will manage the EC2 instances in collaboration with the application load balancer and the launch template and the scaling policy and CloudWatch. And here you can see that the lab is finally completed and timed out. Again, I pre-configured everything and recorded this at the end of the lab so I can give you the what's what on what you're going to be doing in the lab. All right. So I think you're going to really enjoy this lab. This is where we bring everything together, where we really look at high availability for our EC2 instances, and how we can use the auto scaling with the load balancing to deploy a sufficient EC2 capacity to handle varying loads on our application by adding additional EC2 instances and then removing them when traffic is reduced. All right, so enjoy.